Big story breaking across the world with Mexico at its heart. Donald J. Trump, the president-elect of the United States, has promised or threatened to put tariffs when he takes office as president on Mexico, the United States, and Canada over fentanyl and migrants going into the United States. Mexico has reacted, and this is a big thing blowing up, which we'll be covering almost certainly for some months coming. But I want to give a few reactions to this right away, as it's the heart of what we do here at Crash Out in terms of Mexico, drugs, organized crime, migrants, and all of these things. So first of all, in this video, I'm going to talk about what Trump has said, what we should make sense of that, and then about how particularly Mexico has reacted and about how we should make sense of that, and then a little bit about where this might go, and to understand a bit deeper about these issues. So, Donald J. Trump, elected president, but already starting to make these statements which have real action, like he's almost in government already. Threatening that when he takes power, which is January the 20th, 2025, he made two statements, one directed at Mexico and Canada, saying he put 25% tariff on each of those countries, and one directed at China. So here's the statements, and here's what he said on his social media network, Truth Social. As everyone is aware, thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan coming from Mexico composed of thousands of people seems to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our currently open border. On January 20th is one of my many first executive orders. I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming to the United States and its ridiculous open borders. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily solve this long simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power, and until such time that they do, it's time for them to pay a very high price. Here is the second statement to China, where he says, I've had many talks with China about the massive amount of drugs, in particular fentanyl, being sent to the United States, but to no avail. Representatives of China told me that they would institute the maximum penalty of death for any drug dealers caught doing this, but unfortunately they never followed through, and drugs are pouring to our country, mostly through Mexico, at levels never seen before. Till such time as they stop, we'll be charging China an additional 10% tariff above any additional tariffs on all of their many products coming to the United States of America. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So some thoughts on Donald Trump's statement. So the first is, you have to try and how do we understand Donald Trump making these kind of declarations, taking these kind of actions, and he doesn't act in the same way that a lot of the politicians who have ruled big countries in the West over the last 20, 30, 40 years act in terms of language. It's a lot more aggressive in some ways, a lot more threatening in the kind of language. But what does it really mean? There's a debate about whether you should take Trump seriously. He's a serious politician, but not literally. Also, for a long time, I think a lot of people, a lot of us, all underestimated Trump. We thought he was this weird aberration in 2016. Got in power, came out of power, but then he won the election very solidly in 2024. So I think people are going to take him more seriously. But is this some kind of chess playing, the way he sees it, some kind of 4D chess, to use one of those terms that goes around, that he wants to push Mexico, Canada, China, he wants to push them to take action even before he's taken power, so that they hit migration harder, they hit fentanyl harder before he's taken power. And then he said, well, they have responded to me, I'm not going to actually put the tariffs there. Or is it going to be a situation where there will be tariffs on day one and then a whole trade war? So what's Claudia Sheinbaum's response? So Claudia Sheinbaum, first female president of Mexico, elected by a big majority in June, took power on October 1st. So she made this statement. So this is quite a long letter. I'm not going to read all of it, but some of the important things she says here. She points out there has been a lot of efforts by Mexico to stop migrants going through the country, and she points to that as being a cause of a 75% decrease between December 2023 and November 2024 in migrants, and then refutes the idea that there's a big migrant caravan that will arrive at the border now. She also talks about the issue of firearms traveling from the United States to Mexico and the efforts of Mexico to detain drug traffickers. She talks about the going through Congress a constitutional reform to try and fight fentanyl traffickers, that they're are going to clamp down. But then she also says that tariffs on one side will reach responses, and then ends on a kind of more diplomatic note of saying they have to work together to try and solve these problems. So with Claudia Sheinbaum's response, you have to wonder how much is meant for her base in Mexico to make people feel more confident, perhaps, that she is responding to this as a head of state and she's taking this seriously and negotiating, or how much it really meant in terms of diplomacy. It was an interesting line between trying to say, oh, we want to work together with you in the United States, and not come across as being too weak, as saying we're going to really just bend over and do what you want, Mr. Trump there in Washington. And it's coming with Mexico being at a disadvantage with the United States in terms of economic power and military power, but economic power really in this case. And that whereas a trade war would hurt both countries massively, and Mexico is the top trading partner of the United States. There's more than $800 billion worth of goods and services that trade between Mexico and the United States. This is basically Mexico with the United States, which would really cover Mexico, whereas it would hurt the United States. But the United States also has massive trade with China, Canada, and a bunch of countries around the world, whereas Mexico is so dependent on its trade with the United States right now, which makes it vulnerable. So she is in a difficult position there and trying to strike that tone of being diplomatic, but also not saying we're gonna back down right away. And she makes these points where Mexico really is working to fight fentanyl, to limit migration, and this is a joint effort that we have to do, and it's a complicated issue. How will Trump respond to that? How will he see? Is he judging her? How are we kind of gauging what he can get there? I would say that if we go back to the predecessor of Claudia Sheinbaum, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, her mentor, and the president before, Enrique Peña Nieto, they both dealt with Trump carefully and did concede to him various things while still trying to stand up as well, and managed to avoid things getting really out of control in terms of a trade war or in terms of things really falling apart. We'll see if Claudia Sheinbaum is able to do that well, or what the appetite is in Trump. And he does like to try and use Mexico as a punch bag sometimes. You have to be careful how you deal with that. Very, very tough thing to deal with. So then now, third thing about the issues themselves and about what might happen. So in terms of migration, this really is a bigger issue going back about 10 years or more, where you've had large amounts of migrants that are not from Mexico, but come from across Latin America and the world, cross Mexico, and go into the United States. And actually, since this became a big deal from about 2014, with many of them applying for asylum at the US border, or crossing the US border and crossing over the US border to the United States and applying for asylum, since there's been a big deal from 2014 onwards, Mexico has actually been periodically slowing this flow of migration. And there was, deals with the Obama administration, the Trump administration before, and the Biden administration for Mexico to do this. And it did this, and actually, Mexico hit the flows of migration quite hard in the months before the election on dealing with Biden. So now Trump's coming and said, well, we want to push you again on this. But it's something that Mexico has done. I mean, the numbers you must still big numbers still arrive. And could Mexico push harder? But it does do some of that. Mexico, all of these things Mexico could push harder. How much will it want to push and restrain and use very hard enforcement of trying to stop the migrants coming through the country? On the fentanyl as well. Now, there's been huge amounts of fentanyl that have come through Mexico the last few years. Generally, you've seen now the precursors come from China, comes to Mexico, gets made in fentanyl in Mexico, and gets taken to the United States. And on this case, Mexico could certainly do more to try and restrict the flow of fentanyl. But it's a very, very tough challenge that is dealing with these extremely violent cartels right now. And even if it does crack down, how much will it be able to reduce the flow of fentanyl there? But we might see some more action on this, and that which could then affect the drug flow to the United States, at least in the short term. One thing we can see is that, like in the long term, when you clamp down on certain drug routes, they move around. It's people describe it as the balloon effect. So in fact, before you had fentanyl being made in China completely, and then that was clamped down on, then they sold the precursors to Mexico, and then Mexico made it to fentanyl. If they clamp down on that, will it find different ways in? So straight to the United States, the precursors, or will other countries, if China also responds to this and backs down, then you'll start seeing India increasing fentanyl production, and other countries increasing fentanyl precursor production as well. But we could, in the short term, see some results in that and in clamping down from this, or we'll see, or a very bad scenario where you do see a real trade war developing, and then the cost of living, which was one of the reasons that propelled Trump into the presidency, but the cost of living in the United States and in Mexico going up, and that being pretty tough, and then a lot of tensions rising even further there. So we'll see. So anyway, check out more of the stories and all of this at Crash Out Media. That's www.crashoutmedia.com. Go there, subscribe for completely free, and check out my work there and a bunch of other writers I have working with me, which will be following this story and a bunch of others about drugs, organized crime, Mexico, psychedelics, Grillos, and gangster politics, and following this big issue of Trump 2.0 in the presidency.